Hello, and welcome to Saving People Queering Things, the supernatural podcast where we discuss ghosts, road trips, and free will through every episode of the TV series Supernatural. Today, we are pulling up to a very special bonus episode on the topic of alternate universes, Destiel, and fan fiction. I'm August, your host, and my pronouns are they, them. With me today is a very special guest. Just can you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your experiences in the supernatural fandom and anything you want listeners to know before we get started.
So my name's Joss. Pronouns are they, them. I'm French. So if I make any mistake, I apologize in advance. I started watching Supernatural in '06 when it started being broadcast in France. And I started writing Destiel fics about 3 years ago in English, which is in my mother tongue. That's pretty much it, I think.
I didn't realize you had been watching since 2006. That's
almost the beginning.
Like as soon as the earliest you really could have.
I wasn't as active in the fandom at the beginning because I didn't have access to the internet like I have today. But I've seen things. I've been around. So that's quite a long time being in the fandom.
Yeah, you're a veteran.
Yeah, you could say that.
Did you watch live or close to live for most of that time?
At the beginning in '06, '07, and maybe until 2010, I think. I was watching on French TV, so we had a little bit of a delay.
Right.
Like maybe a year, I'm not sure. And then I started watching live or almost live, like the day after when the episode would be released, around 2010 or 2011, I think. And then the 4 or 5 last seasons I was watching live.
Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So today, as I said earlier, our topic is alternate universes, also known as AUs, specifically Destiel AUs, which obviously means we're going to be talking about fan fiction because that's one of the primary ways AUs are explored in the fandom. By nature of this topic, this discussion may and probably will contain spoilers up to and including season 15 of Supernatural. So if you haven't seen the whole show, this is your warning. Spoilers ahead. If you have not seen all of Supernatural, you don't want spoilers, we will be back with our regular episodes next week. So stay tuned for that. So when we talk about alternate universes in the Supernatural fandom, Destiel particularly, we're often talking about fan fiction, but we also talk about alternate universes within the canon show. So maybe a good place to start is with a bit of a definition. How would you define an alternate universe?
So this is basically where you take the character from any stories and paste them in a completely different universe. You can also have AUs within canon. A fixed fic is gonna be considered AU's divergent canon. It can be a bit of an AU. Basically, it's a big old family where you take all of your characters and put them in another universe. There's so much genre and subgenre. My favorite is modern alternate universe, but it can be different for everyone.
I think that's what's so much fun about alternate universes is there's so much freedom to kind of just play with whatever genre you like reading or writing.
It's really the taking of your characters and just putting them in another setting, and that's what makes it so interesting to me, at least.
Yeah, it's like I don't know, when you're a kid and you have the toys that go in one set and then you take those toys and you're like, I'm going to take these toys outside. Yeah. And I'm going to play the same thing. They're going to be the same characters, but I'm going to play with them in the forest now. Like, it's the adult version of that, basically.
Yeah, that's it. You change the setting. So
yeah,
everything's different except your characters, and you're able to shape your characters the way you like it. And I think it gives a little bit more room than if you're writing canon, which is more difficult to me, but you have freedom.
Yeah, I agree. I also find writing canon compliant stories fairly challenging because I don't have the best memory for some of those details, and I think there's more fun things you can explore when you can kind of go outside of the realm of what we saw on the screen.
Yeah,
you used the word paste, like pasting them into a different universe, and I like that because that kind of speaks to how much at least for me, a good AU is when I can still tell it's those characters.
That's why I was talking about shaping, because it's up to the writer to shape their characters the way they like. So some of them are gonna be really different from the characters you have in canon, and some are gonna be very close to the person you have in canon without all the drama of canon and the trauma. But yeah, to me, a good AU, and that's up to me, a good AU is when you can tell that this character belongs to canon, when the characterization is so good that you can see it, you can feel it.
I can picture it. Like when I'm reading, if I can picture like Jensen and Misha in this alternate universe, and I can picture some of the same mannerisms and characteristics that I've seen them actually play in canon, that's when I'm like fully immersed in an AU.
Same goes for me.
I mean, Supernatural became so meta over the years, and it did its own flavor of alternate universes stories within the canon, which I also think is maybe one of the reasons that these stories are so popular in fandom and fanfic.
Not many shows are able to do that. I think the only one that came to mind is shows from the Arrowverse, and that's really proper to the Arrowverse itself.
Yeah.
But a show like Supernatural is, I think it's a testament to how long the show ran, so they were able to do more than the little show. I think the first alternate universe happens in season 6 with the French mistake.
Yeah, I think that's the first official one because we get like an episode. We get like the Jin episode in season 2, but that's not like it's still all in Dean's head. So yeah, I think French Mistake is the first one.
And then we have Apocalypse World. We have The Bad Place, Earth 2, Anticorp, Scooby Doo, and then all the AUs that Chuck shows Sam in season 15. So
Right.
I don't know how many that does it, but that's a lot. Even for a show that run for 15 seasons.
Yeah. Well, and some of these, like thinking of like French Mistake and like Hunter Corp's World and Scooby Doo Universe, those are one episode AUs.
Yeah.
Like they only appear once. They don't really get referenced again. That's like a lot of interesting storytelling that goes into like pulling characters into an alternate universe and then immediately putting them back. I think Supernatural did a good job of like making it relevant to the main story in the regular universe.
It's also made, they don't talk about every AUs we see on the show afterwards, but it's there. So there's a potential for it to come back at any point. And so they could use it, they could have used it to do pretty much anything.
One of my favorite flavor of fanfic AUs is when someone takes an AU that we already know from the show and then just expands it. So like an AU that I really loved was I believe it was called The Jensen Mistake, and it was a season 15. They get thrown back into it.
I read that one. It it speaks to me. I think I read it. I read one set in Hunter Corps, and they had been switched. SPN, Cass and Dean had been switched with Hunter Corps, and they were trying to find their way to each go back home, and it was pretty cool.
That's fun, and it like gets to be really like kind of cracky in terms of like really fun, silly. Any AU that like plays with French Mistake World is kind of like that.
Yeah, and you can really play on the differences between characters because they're intrinsically different.
Yeah. So obviously, like we've kind of already started it, but most discussions of AUs in the fandom world are about fan fiction because obviously that's where you get to explore an AU in depth in whatever way you want. And you've written quite a number of AUs. You're like very prolific in your writing, and so I know you have a lot of thoughts on the process. That's a lot of why we wanted to have this discussion because I know you have a lot of things to say on this. So yeah, I'll jump into some questions and yeah, some of your thoughts more.
Do you mean like the process of it?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear about the process, the rationale, what you enjoy about it, really anything you want to share as we kind of go through this. Maybe my first question is, what are some of your favorite AUs or AU authors that you have read that maybe have inspired you or that you've just really loved?
As far as authors go, I always go through Castiel's Lost Wings.
Yes.
She's a dear friend of mine. Dothraki Shilmaiden that we've talked about before. Also, my friend Emmy, who goes by One More Offbeat Anthem.
Oh, I've definitely read something by
She
them.
writes a lot of smaller fics, shorter fics, but some of them have broke me apart. She's so good at it. So I usually go through all of their fics, and then I have a couple that are very dear to my heart. So The Luck You Got by Castiel's Lost Wings. It's loosely inspired from Shameless, the US version. It deals with some pretty heavy subjects like drug addiction, fan family. The very first AU, Destiel AU I ever read was When the Magnolias Bloom by Flurry X. It takes a bit from canon because it happens as if the apocalypse happened, and 10 years after, Dean and Cass have not seen each other, lost contact, and they bump into each other, and that's where it starts. And this one absolutely wrecked me. I can't reread it to this day because it made me tear up until the very end. It was so good.
And that's your first experience of an AU. Wow.
Well, yeah, I read a bit of AUs before for another fandom, which was Arrow, but the very first stories that truly broke me apart were Destiel's.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
that would be the first two. Then I go with Castelnova's Office, This Is Dean by Valadine. Mallory, if you see this.
I've also loved Mallory's stuff. It's incredible.
It's one of the first fanfic I've owned as a book too, and
Cool.
a really fun story with some pretty awesome characterization. Then I go with On Life and Living by Emmy, One More with Anthem, which deals with really difficult subjects like suicide, like mental health, depression, and she did it masterfully. Go read it if you have time. It's on the shorter side, but it's so good. And the last one I say would be Separate Ways and Sleeping Dogs by Subsicles, which deals with Dean's links to alcohol and sobriety in such a raw way that I don't think I've ever read anything like this before, and it was so good. Subsicles as a whole, as a writer, as a way with words.
Yeah, no kidding.
And this one, I know this one is not typically the Subsicles fic that gets wrecked the most, but that's the one that touched me the most.
Cool. And that's actually one that I don't think I've read. And I've read, I would say, most of Sobsicle's work.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna have to go and find that one. I
Yeah.
think it's really cool. And we will put links. I will put links to all of these in the episode description. So if you are looking for them and you're listening to this, you'll be able to find them. If for some reason you can't find them, reach out to myself or just and we'll help you find them because
Yeah.
these are all incredible. I think it's really cool how AUs, like as a reader, because you already know the characters and you already like have attachments to them, it makes it easier for those AUs to deal with like really difficult things and topics. Like maybe a story with characters I don't know that's dealing with something traumatic similar to something I've been through would be too hard to get into. But if I get to read about Dean and Cass experiencing something that like links to my own experience, sometimes I think that can be a really comfortable way to explore something that's really hard. And I think that's something that I really appreciate with AUs.
Even as a writer, I know I use my characters as a way to get catharsis through my own issues with addiction. I know we're going to talk about patient love at some point, but it was the very first AU that I really developed and thought through. And it was easier for me to write for Dean and for Cass than really creating whole other characters. I knew them already, so
Yeah.
it was easier for me to shape them the way I wanted and to give them this experience and this experience. So that was easier for me to write that way instead of creating a character that didn't exist before, if that makes some kind of sense.
That absolutely makes sense. I think that is kind of I think that's a lot of why a lot of us write fanfic is like sometimes it's so much easier to start with characters you already know and care about and then do the thing that you're really passionate about writing about, like bringing them into that world, doing that like how are they similar to where they are in canon? How are they different? How do I get to like kind of play with the sandbox of that? It's like that mix of like new and familiar that's really powerful as a writer and as a reader.
And that's where the challenge is too. It's you have to, we've talked about it before, but you have to find a way to shape your characters the way you want to without taking away exactly what they are. If you're not in canon, I'm always thriving to make Dean as much Dean as possible. So that's always a challenge, especially when you write AUs.
Especially with the farther you go from canon, like the more AU that it is, you know, obviously if you're writing something that's kind of canon divergent AU, you've got a little bit more. It's a little easier, I think, to keep in character. When you write something that's, you know, they're not in the supernatural universe, especially I think modern AUs can be some
Yeah.
of the more tricky ones because you are transporting them to such a different environment and keeping that like voice. Like I when I read AUs, that's a huge piece of like what will keep me reading is I'm like, can I feel, do these feel like these characters? If they don't, that's a lot harder of a read for me.
And it's also really challenging when you write a lot of AUs to not write the same character again and again and again.
Ooh.
Because Patient Love Dean isn't Parachute Dean,
Oh
and
no, not at all.
it isn't Glory Hallelujah Dean. All of these characters have to be a completely different person from each other, but they also have to feel like Dean, canon Dean. That's where the challenge is. But yeah,
Yeah.
like you said, immediately, they're not the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you put them all in the room together, I'm confident that they, well, some of them might start a fight, would get along, but at the end of the day, they're not the same characters.
I hadn't even thought of that like from the writing perspective of like yeah, when you write so many, I've been like reading fanfic for many years and I used to write fanfic, but I haven't written a ton for supernatural until starting kind of this year. And so I don't have as much experience with that, but I like what you were saying about how that has to you have to differentiate while keeping that kind of core intact. Whenever people say that like writing fanfic is easier than other types of writing, it's things like that that made me go, that's not absolutely not the case, because you have to do that's a really subtle thing you have to do to make them different and feel different.
So also feel like our Dean.
Yeah.
That's where the challenge is.
Yeah.
And I talk about Dean because Dean's my characters of choice,
Yes.
but it's the same with Cass. Cass not the same in any of my stories.
And Cass is a really interesting one because within canon, like, I mean, Dean, we have different versions of Dean within canon for sure, and alternate universe versions of Dean. But Cass specifically, even within his canon arc, has very different,
Yeah,
like, almost characterizations that have very different tones. Like, you think of I Watch the Bees, Destiel versus like Emmanuel versus seasons 4, 5 Cass versus Purgatory versus like all of those different versions of Cass have different kind of voices, and doing that, you're doing that kind of same thing if you're doing fanfic, if you're doing AU.
I'd argue that it's even more challenging to do so in AUs because you have to find the right tone for him.
Yeah.
Because he has to be a little bit like he has to not fit as well as the rest of the people, but he has to fit at least a little. So you have to find the scale. It's not always easy. Castiel's characterization is really tricky.
Cass is the one I find similar to you. Like I find Dean feels really a lot more comfortable to me, and because I relate to Dean in a lot of ways, I find it's easier to play with different versions of him. Cass, I find there's a couple of versions that I'm more comfortable with, but there's a lot getting that tone right. Like you said, like Cass is part of his character is that he doesn't quite fit in any environment. So then figuring out how to do that in an AU when it's a totally different environment and going, okay, well, what is it about him that makes him a little bit in the same way that an angel and a human are? He's just a little out of sync, and
it's different. And you've got to find the right scale to find the right thing. And Cass is more difficult to write for me because I didn't feel more comfortable, like you said. But I know for a fact that some people are the other way. Write Cass as if Cass was easier for them. and Dean's is more complicated. So
Yeah.
I guess it depends on the person, the writer.
I think that's kind of cool too. Like it's part of why I like reading a variety of writers, because often I can sort of tell who's their natural, like who's their natural voice, who do they lean on, because that's really where they shine. And then who are they, have they really crafted and worked really hard to understand and write? Because both of those are like really cool to see. And I think with cast, like specifically when I'm thinking about it, I find like there's like one era of cast that I find a little easier, and it's actually really early seasons cast. Like I find season 4, 5 cast voice is a little
Okay.
easier to tap into for me, which is I never thought of until this moment. But I think it's interesting. Like I feel like with casts, at least for me, I almost take a baseline. I'm writing an AU, I'm thinking about an AU. What's my baseline? Which version of cast from canon is most similar to the version I want to tap into? And then branch out from there.
That's interesting because I have a process that's completely different.
Oh,
Uh,
cool.
I over outline. I'll outline the shit out of a story up to the point where for Patient Love, I had a pre timeline with
Oh, wow.
date of birth, when Dean leaves to join the army. I had Dean's first deployment, Dean's second deployment, Dean's deployment in Iraq the first time. So I have all of this outlined.
And all that's pre the story.
Yeah, and that's just for me to be able to see things in a way that makes sense to me. But none of this has ever been used within the story, at least not the patient love as it is. It might have been used in the timestamps afterwards, but it was never used before. And that's just because I have to be able to see my story and write bios about every characters, even characters that we just see 2 or 3 times. I have a full bio on Benny.
Wow.
We see Benny like at the end of the
Yeah.
story, but I have his entire history written just because I have to know how he is and why he is the way he is before writing it.
As a reader of your work, like that comes through, I think, in like your characters always feel super fleshed out. Like I never feel like you've just taken them from canon and plopped them in and like seen what happens. Like I always feel like yours have a ton of roots in whatever history you've given them. And that makes a lot of sense as to why. Like you've done, you know what, how they've gotten to this particular point.
I can't write it if I don't know what they've been through before and what made them who they are at the moment. And in Patient Love specifically, when I began writing the story, I had outlined, I think, 13 chapters. It's 20 chapters in the end. And I have a new storyline that came up when I was writing, I think, chapter 8, that ended up being, spoiler alert, Benny coming back and asking Ding to come back into the Navy SEALs to lead the team. That wasn't written.
Interesting. That was
It just came up,
yeah.
and I remember I texted my best friend in the middle of the night saying, "Should I do that? It would add like maybe 5 or 6 chapters, a considerable amount of pain. What do you think?" And she said, does it mean more angst? Yes, go ahead. That's how it happened. A couple of things were not supposed to happen and happened because people kept commenting about the letters.
Yeah.
Would Dean find out Cass found the letters?
Yeah.
At the beginning it wasn't supposed to.
Oh,
I, I
interesting.
I just put it in there because people kept asking,
Yeah.
and I started asking myself, wouldn't it be cool if he knew? Because we all knew, we all read the
Yeah.
letters. What if he knew? So that wasn't planned, but the rest of it, I have their bios.
That's
Everyone in
so
the
cool.
story.
And that's like so I think what's cool about what you just said is like they not only like you have a such a strong outlining that gives your work this kind of richness, but also you have the ability to adjust and like make changes as you go. Like you said, that big plot line that wasn't planned originally, but is ended up being so important to the story. And then the letters, I think that is also a super cool thing about fanfic is that like you have this relationship with your readers as you're still writing that
Yeah.
no other kind of like very few other kinds of storytelling.
That's also because, contrary to what I should be doing, when I start posting, I'm usually not done writing. Um, Patient Love, I think when I started posting, I had 5 or 6 chapter ready. And as I was publishing one chapter every week, I kept seeing the comments. And so I wrote more. And then it threw a wrench through my planning. And then chapter 14 happened, St. James, and that's the one that basically broke my entire timeline because it wasn't planned. It ended up being like 10K, I think, even more. And then I had to take a little break and write ahead. But yeah, usually that comes because, contrary to what I should be doing, I'm not done writing when I start posting.
That's led to some really interesting things that have brought into the story. So I'm always curious as to how people's process works in terms of like how much do they write before they start posting, because I'm never sure. Like, I'm working on a couple of projects right now, and one of the big questions in my mind is kind of like, at what point do I want to start posting? Do I want to be totally finished as what I've done in the past? But I would kind of like to experience that as you go release kind of thing, because
Yeah.
I think there's some cool things that happen with your readers.
It's more the ADHD in me that says post it, post it, post it, and then shit happens and it's posted and I'm not ahead of my schedule. It's what's happening to me with Vital Signs, which is
Right.
that I'm currently posting. I'm in the middle of chapter 3, and I think I haven't updated the story for more than 2 months, which isn't something that I like, but that's the way it is.
Hey, it's the way it is. And I don't know, speaking as someone who's reading and also I don't read a lot of in progress. I only read in progress from like writers I really trust.
That's a testament.
So that's a testament to your work, because I like love your work. And so I am reading that in progress and I'm very excited about it. But like when you get the chance to write it, when it gets to be posted, it'll be amazing. And there's also something kind of exciting. Like, I'm excited for when I wake up one day and there's an email in my inbox saying there's a new chapter, or go on Twitter and see there's a new chapter. I think that's like a fun thing as a reader to experience with an author that you love. Yeah, we've talked about it a little bit already, but my next question was, what are your favorite AUs that you've written?
Well, the I'm gonna go with the obvious because I love everything I've written.
Good, you should.
Everything has a different flavor. I really wanted to do a Glory Hallelujah, which is a rockstar AU, because it tapped into my love for punk rock music, and San Francisco, which is a city that I dream of discovering one day. And I really wanted to write that rockstar AU with Cass being the rock star as opposed to Dean, because it's usually the what's the word for this?
Like the other
It's
way around.
the other around, and so that was really fun to write. But yeah, the Patient Love is my baby, and it was really cathartic for me to write. I think I quieted down a lot of my pain through it. So yeah, I'd go with Patient Love.
That's amazing. Can you, for those who haven't read Patient Love, can you give a little like, what is Patient Love about?
So when you start the story, Dean is a Navy SEAL, which is, I think, the higher ranks possible in the U.S. military. Is just gone through a really important accident while on mission, and so is given the choice to either stay in the Navy but be given a desk job, which is completely like that's not something you want when you're in Navy SEAL, or be given severance pay and go back to civis. And at the very beginning of the story is about to make the choice, and then Sam calls and say, "Hey, Jimmy's dead," and that's when Cass arrives in the story. Jim is Cass' twin brother. Just died in a shooting in a convenience store, and so Dean decides to go back home for the first time in 10 years. And that's when you learn that Dean and Cass used to be together 10 years before. And then you get acquainted with Cass, which is a roller coaster.
Yes, it is.
Cass is a recovering addict. has been clean for about, I think, 8 years at that point. And all of that is melted together and linked together. And so the first time Dean and Cass see each other again is at Jimmy's funeral. And they keep seeing each other, running into each other. And you learn a little bit more about why they broke up, how they broke up, and then shit keeps happening. That's about it.
Yeah, that is a great pitch. And like I'll say, like I think Patient Love was the. I'm trying to remember if I read Parachutes or Patient Love first. And I don't actually remember which one I read first, but I have like a lot of affection for both of them. But I think Patient Love is, you can tell so much of your heart went into it, and it's such a like gentle, tender handling of a lot of really complex like trauma with Jimmy's death and Cass's addiction and like the recovery, and like all of those things are really beautifully handled. And like obviously it's a story with a lot of really big stuff. It's a really beautiful story. And so I will say, if you haven't read it and you're listening to this, like highly recommend.
Like I said before, you have the opportunity to give each characters this or that or this. So I gave Cass my recovering addiction problem. I gave Dean my rage and my fear, and I gave Jimmy a little bit of, how do I say that? Because Jimmy is not in the story, but is in the story still.
He's crucial to the heart of the story.
I think Jimmy is my favorite characters in Patient Love.
I loved Jimmy, and I love like, and Jimmy, you did such an amazing job of taking a character that we don't know very well from canon, giving him this whole story that became really meaningful, and creating this like character that. And usually, I don't find that like a character that's not from the original canon, or a character that's so like maybe different from the original canon. Usually, those are characters I'm a little more neutral on in AUs, but I loved Jimmy so much in your characterization.
Jimmy was the center point that I was afraid that readers weren't getting a good read on him. That's why chapter 14, St. James, happened. Only because I was afraid that people would misunderstand why Jimmy did
Yeah.
and who he was and why he did it. And so a lot of myself went into all of these characters. But yeah, I gave my all to this story. So it's probably gonna be the most personal story I've ever written. Even if I give stuff from myself to all of my story, Parachutes is very close to my heart too, but in a different way. And yeah,
It's amazing. And it's fanfic is a huge gift that writers give to the fandom, especially when they put so much of themselves into it. And like I think that's kind of the beauty of fanfic too, is that people have stories that are incredibly personal to them, and people have stories that they just had a lot of fun writing, and you get the whole range. I mean, obviously like Destiel, like on Archive of Our Own, the most written for pairing. There are over a million fic.
there's a reason.
Yeah, there really is. And so many of those are AUs, wonderfully crafted AUs, which you'll never run out of stuff to read.
No, impossible.
Going a little more general, both, and this can be within your writing or within reading, what are some of your favorite tropes or tags within alternate universe stories?
I love a good getting back together because it implies that something went wrong. And usually, when something went wrong, it implies that there's a tag with angst or with a happy ending or something like that. So I usually love a good getting back together. Anything angsty as my vote for obvious reasons. And I love when, I don't know if there's a tag for it, but I love when there's something implying that things are going to get worse before it gets better, because that implies that there's a journey, if that makes sense.
That there's like gonna be like a bit of a roller coaster of like it's harder and then it's better. And
I usually try to find stories in where Dean isn't especially emotionally repressed, or I kind of stay away from that tag because right now it's not the Dean I'm writing. Obviously, people are writing him that way, and that's fine. But I kind of try to stay away from this and usually find a tag with happy Dean with happy bisexual Dean, or something like that.
Something where he's comfortable in that part of his identity.
The plot isn't around this part of Dean, but around something else, or Cass. I'm saying Dean, but obviously that goes for Cass too. Yeah, that.
I think that's a cool part of differences between different writers too. Of like the angst you're pulling is from other things in their lives, not their sexuality exploration.
That's not something I usually can write about because I'm not. I haven't gone through that. So I can't take away from my own personal story to write this. So I'd rather write things that I know I'm comfortable with than stuff I didn't go through.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's I think another really cool thing about fanfic is that because everyone brings themselves to it, everyone has these things they're really good at writing because it's from their own experience, and there's so much variety as a result. That whole getting back together tag, like that is fun.
I love a good getting back together tag because that implies that there's been a problem before.
Yeah.
And what's gonna be the problem?
Yeah. And you've done like a variety, like in your own work, you've done a variety of different ones. Because it's funny because I hadn't identified that particular common thread between your works until you said it. And then I went back and thought of the works of yours that I've read and went, oh yeah, that's in all of them, like in different ways.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to remember, but I think the four that I have in mind have some kind of getting back together because Vital Signs is a bit of a different flavor.
Yeah, but it's still that same kind of thing.
Yeah, that's something. Like Vital Signs is about Dean waking up after 2 decades in a coma. So they haven't separated. They haven't stopped loving each other, at least as far as we can tell. There's just a gap.
Yeah.
Kind of getting back together even if Dean was still there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a common thread to all my fics.
And you've done it well and very diversely, which is fun. Are there any alternate universes you really want to write in the future?
I think I really wanted to do Vital Signs because that's my current whip, because it's inspired from a French TV show that I love dearly. And it's really challenging because I don't want to write the same thing that the TV show was.
Yeah.
But I want it to remain Destiel, but to be as gut-wrenching as the show was to me. So that's something that's been brewing for at least 3 years,
Okay,
I think.
wow.
And so I'm in the middle of that. And afterwards, I really want to write a sequel to Patient Love. Same, it's been brewing for some time, and that's about it for now. We'll see what I can come up with when I'm finished with Vital Signs.
Yeah.
It usually comes after I'm done with the story.
That makes sense. I think it's cool with something like Vital Signs too. You're balancing two sets of canon. You're balancing the plot canon of the TV show it's inspired by, and you're balancing the canon characters of Supernatural with then your own like story. And that's I think often also a cool thing in AUs is a lot of AUs pull from other stories. A lot of my favorite AUs too are rewrites.
The thing that's cool with Vital Sign is I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one, but maybe the only one who have watched the show and constantly rewatched the show. I'm rewatching the show right now while I'm writing to make sure that I'm still following the plot loosely. I'm the only one that watched the show, probably. So that's fine.
As a reader of it, I'm like, it's not a show I've watched. So I'm just going into it. It's totally fresh for me. I have no idea where you're going with the story beyond my guesses. And I'm not going to look it up because I don't want to know any of the plot points you're going to maybe pull from.
I want to look it up because there were a couple of things that happened in the show that I didn't want to do. In the original show, Falco, which is Dean in Vital Signs, wake up and his wife is with someone else who's working with Falco. And at the end of the show, Falco dies. Dean doesn't die.
I appreciate that. I would not have read it if it was that.
I'm not having Dean dies.
Yeah, that would be that's one of my few nopes on fics is I don't do ones where one of them dies at the end.
I won't ever kill Cass or Dean. I'm not able to. I wouldn't survive it.
Yeah, that's cool too. I think with AUs, like thinking about reading them and also writing them, is that when there's like a third thing you're pulling from in terms of your AU, whether you're like rewriting something that's already existing in another story both the ability to, like, if anyone has seen that TV show, they might be able to see connections and enjoy those connections. But then for anyone who hasn't, it's totally brand new, and there's like different levels. Like I sometimes I'll look for an AU specifically of something else I like, because, or I'll want to write an AU specifically of another story because I want to bring Dean and Cass into, whatever story that other story I love. And I think that's like also really fun.
I can tell when someone's looked up the show because they're already suspicious of one character or already predicting what can happen, and it's very close to what happens in the TV show. And I'm like, I got
You're
you.
like, oh, you're doing your research.
But you're gonna go for a ride
You're
first.
gonna have fun messing with their expectations a little bit. Do you have any advice for those who want to write alternate universe stories?
I would say, but again, because it's me, I would say outline the shit out of your story because that allows you to flesh out your characters just the way you like it. And even if it ends up being a lot of details that you don't use in the end, it's for you. You're going to be able to create your story more easily if you have it outlined. But again, that's really personal. I know some writers don't outline and go ahead just like this without any parachutes or. And the second thing I would say would be don't limit yourself. You have a whole new universe to yourself. You can do whatever you want in it. You can create whatever character you want if you want to go original character or take a character we see for 5 minutes in the show and make it count in some way. You can do whatever you want. It's an AU.
There's no rules. There's so many options out there.
No rules, no rules. Just what you set yourself.
And that's the fun of it. This giant sandbox of opportunities.
That's it. You pick what you want and then you have fun with it. Don't overthink it. If you think that something's meaningful for you, then it's meaningful for you and it's gonna hit the target most of the time.
That is the place to stop. Is there anything else that you want to say or to talk about with this topic?
I know I didn't talk a lot about parachutes.
Yeah, do you want to talk about parachutes?
Yeah, it was cathartic in a different way than patient love. It was also, I know it's a big ick for a lot of fans, a lot of readers to have. I don't have that tag anymore on this story, but I had a tag that said cheating, which can be an ick for a lot of people. So going through that whole universe of divorces and having Cass and Dean basically hating each other, and that was a first for me. So that was really fun to play with, but also very difficult to calibrate, if that makes some kind of sense.
It does. And as a like someone who's read parachutes, like I often have that sort of ick around. I'm not a huge fan of. There's got to be like there's got to be a good way of this author playing with that trope for me to feel satisfied and not like mad at the characters about it. And I think you walked that without giving away like things. I think you walked that really well.
At the beginning, I had that tag. I had the cheating tag. I think I said in the open notes, like, don't be too mindful of that tag because I can spoil things, but I have to warn people that there's going to be things happening around that theme.
Yeah, that note was helpful for me.
Yeah. And so I was a bit afraid that people would pass on the story because of it. Even if it didn't happen, it was a centerpiece of the story again.
Mm-hmm.
I had the most fun writing the emotional scenes in that one. I think the big fights that they have and then the big conversation that they have afterwards were, I think I wrote that even before I started writing the rest of it, of the story. Just like I wrote, I think I wrote chapter 12 of the conversation part of chapter 12 of Patient Love almost at the beginning because I had it stuck in my head. It's the part where they're on the deck and basically saying I love you too, but we can't be together. Yeah. And I wrote that very early on, and I just had that conversation stuck in my head, and I couldn't write anything because that was it. And
That was waiting.
yeah, and I did the same with the emotional scenes in parachutes.
Cool. So your outline allows you to be able to then do some of those scenes, like write some of those things out of order because you know where they
Really,
fit.
just really specific scenes, not a lot, but usually very conversation um, scenes I flesh out a bit beforehand when they're really emotional, because usually it comes in waves and I have to take the tide.
Yes. Yeah. I think
That's to write it.
that's maybe another great piece of advice is like write the thing that's pushing at you to write.
Yeah, I would. I also, not as much as I used to, but I used to wake up in the middle of the night with a line or two, not necessarily specific to the story I was writing at the time. And I have a note in my phone with every every single one of these sentences written. And usually the day after I would wake up and reread it and say, what the hell? What the hell just happened? And I ended up using a few of those in certain of my stories.
That's really fun.
So yeah, that can happen too.
Yeah, take the inspiration wherever it comes, even if
Yeah.
it's even if it's strange. I think that is all of the questions that I have, and this is a very brief look into alternate universes and fanfic and Destiel fic specifically. But if you're listening, if you don't read or listen to fanfic, maybe this will give you some ideas of things you might like to try.
Yeah, and again, there's so many authors. Don't limit yourself to little old me or anyone, really. Just go with the flow, go with what feels right, and then you'll find what you really like.
That is, I think, maybe a perfect place to end our discussion. That's all that we have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find you and your work on the internet? And I will link anything you say in the episode description as well.
You can find me on Archive of Our Own if you type Chaotic Dean. And then you can find me on Twitter, which is chaotic underscore Dean. And I'm Chaotic Dean on Tumblr. I think that's about it. Basically, I'm Chaotic Dean everywhere.
Helps to have the same username everywhere,
Yeah.
honestly. Yeah, so yeah, if you're listening, thank you for being here today. You can subscribe to Saving People Queering Things wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can find links to all of our social media and our Discord server, which is through our website, queeringthingspodcast.com. Thank you all so much for coming along for the ride, and we wish you a peaceful road until we meet again.